let's get it right, set up right. Okay, that's pretty good. Perfect. So Bob, just I'm interested to know first of all some of your.
Is this as a video or a still? This is a video.
Video, yes.
I'll get okay.
Tell us a bit about your personal background and your first involvement with the Cardine movements, YCW, YCS.
Well, I was a young minor seminarian in 1947 at the age of 13, and I came across, entering the seminary with me in 47 was Joe Greeley, Grealy, and he had been in the first YCW group at Parkside in Adelaide, and he introduced me, he showed me a leader's bulletin with the format of those days, which was a very simple Senior Judge Act. And then that I was just intrinsically interested in the, for some reason, in the life of YCW, and I think I can't clearly remember the stages. I was only, as I say, 13, and there were starting in, two of my sisters had been foundation members of the YCS in South Australia in Adelaide, and I knew of the concept of YCW and YCS.
So that was even earlier that they'd been involved in YCS? They
had been as foundation members in the early 40s,
okay.
About 44, 45, when it was established in schools in Adelaide. But I was a child at the time, even younger, and had no grasp beyond the fact that it was a good guy thing. But gradually, just my reading of those books in the seminary, the articles that came in leaders' bulletins of those days of YCW, I started to have a feeling more than an analysis, a feeling for young workers, who weren't, there was no great class consciousness in Adelaide that I was encountered. If you're a Catholic, in my experience, you're a Labor voter. That was an Irish working class mystique, even though my own family, my mother was a teacher. The sympathies were Labor, and most of the young people that I met through the church would have some link increasingly with YCW. And in fact it was involved in a gradual struggle, a reasonable one, to replace the previous Catholic Young Men's Society, which was in the line of the French patronage, or not quite, but it was rather directed by older men, a sporting organisation with debates. That was gradually replaced in the Adelaide Diocese in my time by the Archbishop, who was Archbishop Biovich. And he was the bishop's delegate, I think, at the time, on the bishop's conference for YCS. And although he was not an analyst, he, through the Australian National Secretariat of Catholic Action, formed in the 30s, there had been a slow evolution towards the concept of YCW. And finally, the YCW was adopted as the structure for the youth Catholic Action in Australia. That was one of the forces that tended to put us in line, although the seminary had almost nothing to do with it. Through the contact with young people at the time, I gradually started to look for books on Cardine especially. He was, through the YCW, something of a hero figure. The YCW, I think fortunately, was in some way embodied in Cardine. There wasn't a young worker who was the symbol, it was Cardine, and his dynamic started to come through in Sheed and Ward publications that I read, and there was a book by Fitzsimmons, I think it was, whom I met on a boat.
John Fitzsimmons. John Fitzsimmons, yeah.
I met him by chance coming back on a ferry from Ireland when I was a priest. But the clarity, I think, of the thinking of the Senior Judge Act, its consistency, and possibly in my mind looking back, its contrast with the timeless nature of the seminary studies, which could well in our time have been almost given in the 17th century as well as in the 20th. It was then probably through seminarian summer schools that were held each year by the YCS that in 1950, I think I went to the first one in Melbourne, I would have been 17, that introduced us to YCWs who were giving lectures at that. The priests were inspiring people, their own faith in the young ones.
Do you remember any of the names of those people?
The priest at the time would have been Frank Lombard, came down especially. I couldn't even name who the others were. They were the YCW National and NCGM, the girls, National Council from their office in Melbourne were the key figures. Interestingly enough, at that stage, Bob Santamaria, who later was at arm's length and vice versa from YCW, he was a very easy speaker there in 1950. Then as the years went by...
At a YCW seminarian summer school?
Yes.
Santa Maria was speaking?
Was speaking in 1950, as was a chap called Jackson, a journalist.
Dennis Jackson.
Dennis Jackson. And they tended to give save us from the threat of communism, which was very real in the Catholic world when I was growing up, even through the Catholic press, because of the experience of the church at the hands of communists in Eastern Europe and in China. There was an awareness of that struggle. It's important to say that there was no conflict perceived between YCW and the anti-communist struggle, but nor was it structurally linked. It was rather regarded that the Catholic action was the uniting theme. This was people involved in the participating in the apostolate of the hierarchy. That gave an orthodoxy to the whole, all the Catholic structures called Catholic action. But in practice, you discovered each of those as a young priest and a seminarian in their own context, their own publications. And the YCW was far and away the best organised, at least that I came across. It was important to say that it was not a strong worker movement, the theme of worker. It could probably be sociologically better described as a Catholic youth organisation that used the Siege Act method, but the great thing that it inherited was a movement of young people, by young people, for the renewal of society and of the church. But at the working level, as a young priest, jumping now to 1955 when I was ordained, the meetings of YCW then...
Before we go on to that, can I just ask you a couple more things about the seminary? Were there any particular people in the seminary that were promoting the YCW YCS Caroline model?
Joe Greeley was an ex-seminarian. He took me to the national headquarters. We travelled together. We went to Manly Seminary for the last 4 years of theology, and we used to visit national headquarters next to St Francis in Melbourne every time we went there. So I met Frank Lombard and I met the national workers at the time out of Melbourne. YCS was almost a non-event. We knew that it was there, and it was probably where the greatest number had belonged to YCS at school. I think it even existed in my time at my school, but I was too young for it. So it was known to be related, and the NCGM was the girls' movement, and again my sisters had been members of that, but I had little idea of that, except that it did involve leaders' groups, and that this was an organic way of thinking for a young priest, was through the leaders' groups. And I'd met a number of them in seminary days. God, this is for me. Can I just hold it there?